In the last decade, I've coached over 1,000 researchers on specific talks, and what I'm going to share with you today is 3 things that help them become great speakers. I'll not only tell you what they are, but I'll also tell you why they're so impactful. You see, unlike what most people feel, speaking's not some gene. It's a skill you can learn. And the 3 things I share with you today will help you get there. The first one's about content, the second one's about tone, and the third one's about audience. And you need to realize all 3. So this first one about content, it's really simple. And it's the opposite of what most people have taught, especially if you're coming from a STEM space. And it's simply this: your research, it is a story. Your research already is a story. And there are a couple of things about the importance of this and why this creates such a dramatic shift. Most researchers think of story, we think of fiction, right? Our research isn't fiction, so our research can't be story. But really, story is just action in the world, right? Your research started with a knowledge gap. You had a hypothesis. You had an idea about how to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Then you did that work and then you found a result. And voila, that's a story. Your research is a story. What we've done is we've deleted the story from the research. So traditional science communication has deleted story. It's not that your research isn't a story, it's that a journal article, background, methods, results, discussion, we scrub story. We scrub the story out of it and just give the data. And that's fine when you're working on when you're doing a journal article. That's the genre. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you move into the speaking space, you need a better conveyor of information. Before we had written information, we had an oral transmission of information. And all the oral transmission of information in the history of humankind happened through story until the last 100 years, when we started writing and producing that writing and then deciding that we didn't need story because we could go back and we could look at the writing, but it was a misstep. It was a misstep. And now that you understand this misstep, now that you understand that the presentation space is the story space, and that your research already is a story, so we're not talking about, when we talk about story, we're not talking about fiction. We're just talking about what actually happened and a logical progression. You had some questions. You figured out what was going on. You figured out something you wanted to do. It didn't work. It did work. You ran into an obstacle. Something succeeded. That's the story. And then you got the result. And now the story continues. Now we need to talk about that result and figure out what to do next. That's the next pieces of the story. It's all story. That's the first thing. The first thing is to get comfortable with story. And the reason that's so important is because in the oral space, story is kind of king, right? Story allows us to make sense of information, and story allows us to remember information. And when you're in the oral communication space, which is what a presentation is, you need people to be able to make sense of it instantaneously in real time. And you need people to remember it 30 minutes later, an hour later, a day later, a week later, a month later. Story helps you get there. So that's one big shift. And this second shift comes along with the first one. The second shift is about being objective. So not only has a traditional journal article erased the story from the research, it's erased the emotion from the research too. It's erased the passion. It's erased the highs and the lows. And all we're left with is the objective middle. And the objective middle doesn't match the story. It doesn't match the content. So not only do we have a monotone problem when we're stuck in the objective middle, we also have a clarity problem. We have an understanding problem because there are times when I'm excited about something, and then there are other times when I'm thoughtful or reflective. And those sound different. If I said there are times when I'm excited about something, and then there are times when I'm thoughtful or reflective, that's the objective middle. That's the objective where we've erased the emotion. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's very hard to actually understand what someone's saying when embedded in the content is emotion, but in the delivery, the emotion is erased from it. So the second thing great speakers do is they're not monotone, right? Which makes them more engaging, which makes them easier to listen to, but it also makes them clearer. It also makes them more clear. And that's one of the reasons that your impact goes up, because impact goes up with clarity. Impact goes up with memory. Impact goes up with clarity. Story helps us remember. Story helps us make sense of things. Moving beyond just objectivity helps us do the same thing. And the third thing people do is they realize something very specific about academic audiences. And that's that academic audiences are bimodal. Let's look at this on the whiteboard. This, by the way, here, this diagram is that not objective part. I did another video on this just a couple of weeks ago, but let's erase that. Okay, let's talk about that bimodal audience space. So if we think about our audience as some people, if we think about a continuum, unfamiliar versus familiar, these are the people who are unfamiliar with our work and our language. These are people who are familiar with our work and our language. And this is simply number of people, okay? So typically what people do is they try and split the difference. They try and not use too much jargon. They try and go into a little bit of detail. They try and speak as if people understand a little bit about what they do, but not a lot, because they don't want to lose the people who don't understand a lot. And they want to talk about what's technically interesting about their work. They want to nerd out. We're academics, right? We're researchers. Want to nerd down a little bit on it, okay? So we want to speak to the people here. That's our temptation. We know that there's some people here that we need to speak with. So we imagine someone halfway in between, and we end up speaking to no one, because there's not actually anyone here. If we think about a curve of what our audience looks like between unfamiliar and familiar, there's a bunch of people here, and there's a bunch of people there. There's a bunch of people who are pretty unfamiliar with what we're doing. They understand science, they may understand the field, but they don't understand the actual area in the field that we're working in. They don't understand the actual methodology that we're using. They don't understand the actual science of that particular component of what's going on. And then there's some people here, there's another group of people there who understand it in a lot of detail, okay? So we need to speak to both these audiences. This is what really good speakers do. Really good speakers speak to one audience and then the other. So they talk with one group and then they dive into the other group. They do something that if you map their talks, and instead of unfamiliar to familiar here, we have time, and here we have highly technical, and here we have general. Good speakers, great speakers, do something like this. They're here, and then they dive down here, and then they come back, and then they dive down here, and then they come back, and they finish up there. And they speak to the technical audience some of the time, and they speak to the general audience some of the time. And a really interesting thing happens when we do this. The technical audience actually appreciates this general conversation because we forget, as technicians, we forget about the bigger picture. This is about the bigger picture, the importance, the potential of what might happen. This isn't nitty-gritty into the jargon and the details. This is about why it matters. And it's a good reminder for the people who are nitty-gritty into the details. The people who aren't in your field, but they are researchers, they are academics, right? They actually want to hear you nerd out a little bit. They want to hear about the details. They want to hear you dive into those more technical areas. So thinking about your audience as being bimodal and thinking about these technical versus non-technical areas, and thinking about where we started with, okay, we're going to tell our research as a story because it is. We're going to not be objective the whole time, but we're going to allow some of the nuance, some of the highs and some of the lows of that story to be told. And we're going to speak to two different audiences. We're going to allow ourselves to actually use our scientific language. We're going to allow ourselves to actually go super technical. It's okay to use technical language. It's good to use technical language. You're a scientist. But we're also going to have general, plain language that people can understand even if they're not in our field. And when we do that, when we do all three of those things, we can talk to 50, 100, 200 people, and we can capture them all, and they can all understand, and they can all remember. And there's something of importance for each of them, regardless of how familiar they are with our work. And that's what we need to be able to do in order to do great research presentations at conferences.